This is the IBJ podcast for the week of September 28th, 2020, brought to you by the law firm Krieg DeVault. I'm Mason King. Welcome back to the podcast, everybody. As you probably know, if you're listening to this podcast, Indianapolis, if nothing else, is a sports town. Sports is one of the 2 or 3 major planks on which modern Indianapolis was built. City officials going back at least 5 decades saw the great potential in playing host to any and all sports and sports-related events. And we're talking from international sports festivals like the Pan Am Games to NBA All-Star Games, the Final Four, and other NCAA championship events, Olympic trials in a dizzying number of disciplines, the NFL Combine, the Super Bowl, to high school band competitions. And I don't mean to belittle those guys because it's fun to have them and they're big contributors to the local economy. For the last 41 years, this strategy has been led by the not-for-profit Indiana Sports Corp. Now, like nearly every other company and organization in the country, it's been thrown for a loop by the pandemic. Consider that the prime ingredients of almost any sports event include hundreds or thousands of spectators. Without sports, Indianapolis is missing at least 2 or 3 pistons in its economic engine. So we wanted to know, how is the Indiana Sports Corp doing, and specifically what is it doing to respond to this extraordinary challenge posed by the pandemic? So our guest today is Ryan Vaughn. He's the president of the Indiana Sports Corp. I'm going to let you know up front that a big chunk of this conversation is about a surprising and ambitious proposal that it made about a week ago to college basketball teams and conferences. In essence, it's offering to turn a big chunk of the Indiana Convention Center into a college basketball bubble, creating courts for competition and practices, for tournaments, and even possibly for entire conference seasons. But we also discuss other ways the ISC is adapting on the fly to the pandemic, as well as the ambitious slate of bids it has submitted for hosting events for the NCAA, the Big Ten, and other sports governing bodies. So here's our conversation. I am pleased to welcome to the IBJ podcast virtual studio Ryan Vaughn, who's president of the Indiana Sports Corp. Ryan, thanks a lot for joining us.
No, super happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
What is the purpose of the Sports Corp? What does it spend most of its time doing?
Yeah, the mission of the Indiana Sports Corp, which has been around since 1979, is to advance and inspire our community through sports. And what that practically means is that we compete against other cities for the right to host major sporting events and to attract major sporting events, to choose Indy. And if we're successful and they choose Indy, we then turn around and help those groups execute those major events. So, think your collegiate championships like the Final Four or Olympic trials, things like the Super Bowl. The major events is our real focus. And then we try and use those events to have positive impact in the community. So it's, driving the economic vitality of downtown, raising the global profile from a media standpoint of the city, engaging our community through volunteerism, and then trying to leave some kind of legacy activity or project that help the youth in our community as well.
And over, as you say, 41 years, there have been several hundreds of events that the Sports Corp has been instrumental in landing. And examples of that would be?
Oh, yeah. It goes all the way back to things like, the Pan Am Games. I think we're teed up for our 8th Final Four. Our 9th will be in 2026. We have a really rich Olympic history. I think we've hosted a number of Olympic trials, whether it's track and field, swimming, USA diving. We have a really rich collegiate history as well. Obviously the NCAA is in our backyard here. We host a number of their championships outside of basketball, rowing, fencing, you name it. A good relationship with the Big Ten Conference. We've had men's and women's basketball for a number of years, and we're the only city to host their football championship. And we're headed into year 9 on that year 10 on that as well.
So of course, with the pandemic, like just the idea of getting more than a few hundred people together in roughly the same place has been completely upended. Can you give us a sense of the different ways the pandemic has just disrupted what the Sports Corp normally would be doing right now?
Yeah, we've had a pretty robust calendar for the last 2020. We've been pretty incredible. 2021 is teeing up to be equally as incredible if we're permitted to exercise those events. But we we had to kind of shut it all down on day 2 of the Big Ten men's basketball tournament in March. And most of our major events that would fill stadiums or arenas, or to your point, are tens of thousands of people, have been canceled. And so, that's been a pretty profound impact, not only on our mission, but our mission's ability to impact the economy in our city. So it's been pretty challenging, but we've stayed pretty dedicated to finding alternative ways to get people downtown safely and responsibly, and really kind of trying to focus on the future.
I would think that just institutionally, I mean, you'd be putting a lot of employees just in different situations and asking them to do lots of new things. Am I guessing right?
Yeah, I mean, we were sort of all hands on deck, like most companies, I would imagine, at mid-March, to think about, how are we going to continue to focus on our mission and have impact, and what do we need to do differently in order to do that, right? So it's rethinking our events. We know that we're not going to hold any kind of events this calendar year that looks anything like the Super Bowl or the Final Four, something of that magnitude. But we also know it's equally important to get people comfortable with coming back downtown and supporting those 80,000 hospitality workers that, really make our events special. So it's a bunch of little one-off stuff that is significant. It helps return people's psyche to this notion that you can come downtown, you can participate in an event, and you can do it safely. And that's really where we focused.
You said that a lot of stuff has been canceled. How many events were on the calendar for this year, and how many do you think you'll end up with at the end of the year?
That's a great question. I mean, we had a number of Olympic events. We had an international water polo tournament. We had Olympic diving trials. I mentioned the Big Ten men's basketball tournament. We had an NCAA regional round scheduled. We had the Division I swimming and diving championship. We had our own golf outing, which helped support our operations, which was canceled. We were able to execute the Indy Ultimate, which is a downtown adventure run, which was great. We did that in late July. We have a corporate challenge, which, the folks that read the IBJ are well aware of our corporate challenge. You guys are great sponsors of that. But that's normally 150 companies and about 5,000 people that participate in that. We, of course, had to cancel the in-person event, but we've spun up a virtual option, and that's been well received. It looks like we're going to have the Big Ten football championship, which is a blessing and a great opportunity for us in the middle of December. So, we've certainly had far more canceled than we're going to host. But we seem to be kind of waking up in the sports world. People are starting to figure it out. How can you have events safely? Thankfully, the testing numbers are improving and regulations are responsibly relaxing, and venues are taking the appropriate precautions. So we're slowly coming back and very excited about the opportunities in the coming months.
How many employees does the Sports Corp have?
We are a nonprofit organization. We have 25 full-time employees, and we usually rotate between 6 and 8 interns every semester. So about 30 at a given moment.
Have you had to lay off or furlough anybody during the pandemic?
We had some positions that were open at the time of the pandemic, which we did not fill, but thankfully we have not had to lay off or furlough folks. And honestly, it's really helped us be in a position to stay strong so that when we're coming back, we can be one of the first cities out of this challenging situation.
I know in the past, maybe kind of middle of last decade, the annual revenue was for the organization was somewhere between maybe like $6 and $7.5 million. Is that where it's been basically since then?
It grows over time. It really depends on the events we have in a particular year. And it's a little misleading from a total revenue standpoint. Our operations budget's about $3 million. The rest of that looks like money in, money out. For example, we may sell tickets to an event, and then we owe that revenue to the event rights holder. I would say our core operating budget is right at $3 million.
Is that budget endangered by the pandemic and the events that have been canceled this year?
Without a doubt. Yeah, I mean, we did a forecast at the end of April. I think most people did, where they took their 2020 budget and lit it on fire and figured out what it was really supposed to look like. And in our likely scenario, we were going to lose about $1.6 million in revenue, which is significant, as you know, relative to our budget size. But the team has done a really nice job pivoting, finding unique ways to raise money. I'd be remiss if I didn't take this opportunity to thank all of those sponsors and members of the Indiana Sports Corp who've stuck with us during this really challenging time, despite the fact that we haven't had the major events to deliver on. So, thank you to that group. But I also really need to thank our board and our board leadership and prior presidents. I mean, we've been well managed long before I showed up, which has helped us to be in a position to weather this storm.
Do you have a sense yet of what the organization is going to look like next year?
Yeah, we're in that process right now. I think most people, we're a calendar year budget, so we'll adopt the 2021 budget in December. We've gone through our first crack at budget planning, and 2021 frankly looks as tough financially as 2020 because we're just not sure when the events and hospitality business is going to rebound, and when it does rebound, to what level. A lot of that is going to be obviously health conditions, but consumer sentiment is just as much a part of that as what the actual health conditions are in our state.
You mentioned the Big Ten football championship. I wanted to do a round of what's happening with this event. The Big Ten football championship was scheduled for December the 5th at Lucas Oil Stadium, and that changed. Where is it right now?
Well, that's a great question. Currently, it's scheduled for December the 19th. That's contingent upon a couple of factors related to both the Big Ten and the NFL. But the Big Ten has indicated that they do intend to have a championship. They do intend to have it in Indy. So, we think it'll be that weekend for sure.
Did I see that there might be some other games played coincidentally with that championship?
Yes, but not necessarily in Indianapolis. So the Big Ten has adopted a very unique schedule given their late start date. They're only playing conference games. So they're playing one another in essence. And then they're all going to play a ninth game. And that ninth game is going to be, the Big Ten is divided into two regions, an East and a West. The number 1 seeds will play each other. The number 2 seeds will play each other. The number 3 seeds will play each other, all on championship weekend. So it's possible, although it's not been decided, that we may have more than one game, but it's more likely that there'll be multiple games in multiple places on that championship weekend. So
for the football championship, I assume, since we don't on any given week really know how many people would be at a Colts game, for example, we just don't know what attendance is going to be for that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think it's an evolving scenario. I mean, eventually you have to sell tickets or not, right? So we know that the Colts have a great plan, and they're welcoming up to 7,500 people for the Colts-Jets game this weekend. However, as a conference, the Big Ten has made a decision to only allow fans who are family members of players or staff, no matter what. Now, that could change. A lot changes frequently, daily, sometimes more than once in a given day. But that's the current situation.
What can you tell us about the NBA All-Star Game, which was scheduled for February of 2021?
Yes, the NBA All-Star Game is typically held on President's Day weekends in February. Was scheduled for 2021. The NBA has announced that it will not be on that date, but they have not made a decision on when it will be. My sense is, from speaking to the Pacers, who are really sort of the lead point of contact on this, is that the NBA is waiting for their season to wind up before they get focused on what next season looks like, and including the NBA All-Star Game.
Is there any reason to think that it wouldn't be in Indianapolis?
Possibly. If you would ask me 8 months ago, is there any reason to believe the Pacers wouldn't play in Indianapolis? I would have told you. I can't imagine why that would be the case. So, I'm sort of beyond certainties at this point in time in 2020.
And then the Final Four. What is the current status of the Final Four? It was on our calendars for April 3rd and 5th.
Yeah, we are full swing ahead playing the Final Four as if it was just like the previous 7 Final Fours that we've had. Certainly scenario planning around alternatives as we become closer and closer and get a better understanding of what that looks like, to your point, not only from fans in the venue, but ancillary events that are really special to the community and really kind of make the environment downtown. What will we do on Georgia Street? How will we activate the convention center? Will we have a dribble activity or a concert? Things of that nature are still under consideration, but we're planning as if we're going to have a regular Final Four, and then we'll scale as required from there.
Okay, let's take a quick time out to hear from our sponsor. This is the IBJ Podcast.
The IBJ Podcast is brought to you by Krieg DeVault, a trusted and dynamic law firm representing a wide variety of local, regional, and national clients. Committed to each other and to every client, Krieg DeVault prides itself on integrity, professionalism, respect, and excellence. Financial institutions, global manufacturers, national healthcare providers, and successful organizations of all sizes and market focus rely on Krieg DeVault to create innovative and successful business solutions. Connect today at www.kriegdevault.com.
All right, we're back with this week's edition of the IBJ Podcast. We're talking with Ryan Vaughn, president of the Indiana Sports Corp, about the group's proposal for creating a college basketball bubble in the Indiana Convention Center. Now, explain to me the collegiate basketball tournament proposal that you sent to colleges and conferences. It was just last week, I think. What was the pitch that you made to these guys?
It's very foreseeable to us. And so we started working several months ago that, the NCAA and the college conferences would wait, understandably, kind of to the last minute to make a decision about what the season would look like and if they could play and under what conditions they could play. Knowing that that was likely the case, our goal was to get ahead in the planning process. So could we develop a scenario that allowed college basketball to have a variety of different types of conference games, non-conference games, small multi-team event tournaments in a controlled environment in a single site that provided safety. And the main goal was there to make sure that when college basketball started, that no matter what the health conditions were, we had a venue and an opportunity to host those games to help college basketball get on its feet. We all believe, I think, that what today looks like will look very different than April, right? But the most important thing is to get started and to get started safely. And so we modeled a lot of our thinking after what Orlando has accomplished around the bubble and the wubble, as they say, for the WNBA and the NBA. And we said to ourselves, we have a very similar built environment, right? We have a convention center which can host multiple basketball courts. That convention center is connected to multiple hotels by skywalks that could be secured. We have hotels who are great partners and under the right circumstances could choose to only sell hotel rooms to a particular client and close themselves to the general public or accessibility. We have great health partners in our community, so we could do testing. We have rich basketball history, so we have the personnel who can host the event. And so we began to sort of assemble a document that put together an opportunity that teams and conferences could take advantage of in order to achieve the games that they need in order to get their season in.
How did that idea come up? Did somebody just raise their hand in a meeting and say, hey, what about the wobble? Or did somebody send out an email? How did just inside the institution, how did that develop?
I guess it's kind of the mentality of Indiana Sports Corp, which is we can sit around on our hands and wait for people to tell us what's possible, or we could go figure it out, right? And so we decided, hey, it's our job to lead. And this year in particular, as the host of the Final Four, and with the NCAA in our backyard, we feel a great deal of stewardship around college basketball in particular. So, how do we lean in here? How do we be the best partner we can to the sport so that it's possible?
Was there at some point at the beginning where people were like, that's too much?
Yeah, it's complicated, right? There's a lot to think about. We're not an organization that typically weighs into medical testing for viruses and the technology changes frequently and the regulations around practice and travel. So you have to be very adaptable. You have to be very committed to sort of understanding the problems and the opportunities on scale. But most importantly, you just can't be afraid to act, right? And so that's why we've said, hey, we're going to put this out there. There may be people that say you're crazy and no, you can't do that. And there may be others going, man, I hadn't thought about that. Thank goodness somebody else is. And we can partner with him and kick this off. Tip this off, excuse me.
And typically, the Sports Corp plans for events, of that kind of magnitude or potential magnitude, years in advance. How nimble do you need to be to pull this off when, potentially the first games could be in 2 months?
Yeah, very adaptable. Yeah, you have to be very, very adaptable. And you have to have that conversation with your staff, which says, I know we normally have 18 months to plan these events. We have less than 18 weeks to plan this concept. To your earlier question about have you asked people to do things that they've not typically been doing in their job description, the answer is we haven't. There's no one we haven't asked to step outside of their job description to help make this possible. And it's really the team coming together that's put together what I think is a pretty compelling product in a community that is trusted nationally to execute on complicated events.
So tell me more about the safety aspect. What are the main planks for assuring the basketball teams that they will be safe?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, I should say that the NCAA and their recommendations around what's permitted and not permitted for college basketball and the conference's adoption of those are going to be the key drivers. But for us, none of that's known right now, right? So what we've done is try to figure out, what would a sort of the most controlled environment look like? How do we build that? What does it cost? And then if the regulations come out and they are less onerous than what we built, we just scale back, right? So this This goes from everything to, finding partners nationally that have expertise in testing. And there's all kinds of different tests and out there, and it's talking to partners for sourcing tests. The pipeline is really challenging to come by. It's sourcing a lab to get you the test in a timely fashion and the results. And again, we don't have any internal expertise in that, but we have great partners, healthcare providers, universities, and of course, good contacts within the NCAA that I think have all informed where we're at. And we'll be ready to act when hopefully when we have that opportunity.
How does this work? A team would come in and check into their hotel. Could they play the next day? Or is there some sort of quarantine that would need to happen?
If the games were tomorrow, for example, and the way that we have this sort of outlined, we would actually mail a test to teams before they travel. We would have them take the test. We would get the results, and we would, in essence, clear them to travel to Indianapolis. Once they arrived, we would administer a different test, which is more rapid test upon their arrival. And if they're cleared there, then they're good to go from that point forward.
Gotcha.
We would then test them based upon their length of stay, either daily or every other day. Kind of depends on one, what their protocols are, and then two, what we think we could reasonably do. But we're finding, this isn't totally static process, right? So some teams will travel with their own test and they want to share the results with you because they have an affiliation with a major medical university and they can conduct it cheaper than we can conduct it, right? Some teams don't have that capacity and they need you to own it, right? So it's really, again, it's having all of the elements in place and then pulling the triggers that you need to pull the trigger to make the event happen.
So these games would take place in the Indiana Convention Center, where there are many, many ballrooms. It's a 750,000 square foot facility. So the way I'm seeing it is you just take what were ballrooms and you turn them into either basketball courts or practice courts. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, there's more to that, but in essence, yes. I mean, the giant halls that you would break them up. You would build a certain number of practice courts. You have to build a certain number of game courts, and the game courts differ dramatically than the practice courts. Of course, there has to be, for almost all these games, there's a media partner, so you need some element of production. You would need probably to affect sponsorships that are affiliated with these games or with these teams. There's signage. You need to build locker rooms, turn meeting rooms into locker rooms. There have to be training rooms because, these athletes need attention. There have to be weight rooms because they're going to be here and they're going to be exercising. So you really have to kind of think through what's in your traditional venue and then how do you build that in the fixed space in the convention center.
I mean, this sounds really super complicated. Is the city going to be able to make money on this? Is this going to be lucrative for the city, or are there other more compelling reasons to do this besides money?
Both, right? So, our goal, as I've mentioned, was to get college basketball started, right? Because we have a big part of college basketball in April when we host the Final Four, and we're also corporate partners and with the NCAA as a community, and college basketball is a big part of their foundation. So that's goal number one. Goal number 1A is we have an infrastructure and hospitality here that is, in essence, dark, right? There are no conventions taking place. We have several hotels that are just closed. Our occupancy rate, which is normally in the high 70s, low 80s, is in the low 40s. And so how do we help generate business so that the people that work in these hotels can go back and earn a living? I mean, these are people that need this work for a variety of reasons. And, on a normal year, it's our great pleasure to deliver opportunities to put these people to work. And so, we're trying to do that.
Oh, so I noticed in the proposal, you've outlined 4 periods of time between November and February in which you would create one of these bubble environments. The biggest block of consecutive days begins on November 25th, which is the beginning of the college basketball season. It goes until January the 1st. That's 38 days. Why so many days in the first block? Is it because, as you say, I mean, you're really trying to jumpstart the basketball season if it needs jumpstarting?
Yes, that, and there's an element of flexibility there, right? We don't quite know how these conferences are going to build their schedules. Typically they would do non-conference games the first part of the year, conference games, really kind of starting late December and January. Some of these conferences are contemplating totally flipping that. which flips the model, right? So unfortunately, we have the space available during that time. And so what we wanted to do is, again, provide maximum flexibility so we could be a solution for them once they determine what their needs actually are.
Now, what kind of interest has been expressed so far?
Yeah, considerable. We've had multiple conferences that we've spoken with that really like the idea, trying to figure out what it all looks like for them financially, what it looks like from a travel perspective, what their schedules are going to be like. It's foreseeable on Friday of this week, the NCAA will likely announce their sort of regimented health guidelines, and that may substantially inform what conferences do relative to the number of games they play, non-conference or in-conference. And so there's a lot of moving parts there. People are very interested. I would say even if they've decided they can't do it, they're very appreciative of just sort of open sourcing this idea so that they know about things they need to consider if they're hosting games on their own facilities.
What's the most common question you've received so far?
Really, it's about testing. That seems to be by far and away the biggest concern, right? Teams know how to travel. Teams know how to play basketball. They know how to practice, work out. They know how their locker room schedules are. Coaches are creatures of habit. What's new in this ball game is security and testing. And so that seems to be the thing that has most people's attention.
How much heads up would you need for a group to come in and successfully pull off maybe a small tournament or a series of conference play games? Could they call up 2 weeks ahead of time?
Yeah, I'd say 2 weeks is probably about right. We've done a lot of work sourcing courts and goals and scoreboards and testing materials. We've had good conversations with hotels, but there's a setup, there's identifying the workforce, there's a migration into the controlled environment, but 2 weeks is probably about right.
You mentioned, so the NCAA has an announcement probably coming up on Friday that will materially affect the decisions the colleges are going to make. When would you expect to hear anything definitive from any of those schools or conferences about whether or not they want to take part?
I would say in the next 2 weeks. We anticipated that this week would be a lot of Q&A and a lot of, everybody getting their ducks in a row. Next week will probably be a little bit more of the same as they figure out how these health protocols impact the decisions they have made. And then it'll be time to plan their schedules, and they'll announce their schedules. That's when we'll be in a position to say, hey, this worked and this is who's coming. But I don't suspect we'll have just one opportunity either. It's foreseeable that we may have a week or two of games and a week or two of darkness and then, come back in a week or two of games. So again, this is about being prepared, pursuing opportunities, and remaining flexible.
Would it be possible for a major or a mid-major conference to host all of its games in this bubble?
Absolutely. We've had conversations with conferences who have talked about doing that from a conference perspective and doing it in the nature I described. Maybe coming here for 5 to 7 days, and then go back to campus or go back to home and then reemerge for another round of games under that scenario as well. So absolutely possible.
How many teams could you have here at the same time?
Well, we can scale up quite a bit depending upon how much of the convention center we can occupy on the schedule. Quite a few. I think our proposal talks about potentially up to 24 teams, but that's a pretty big tournament. The only thing I can think of would be bigger would be the March Madness tournament itself. But it's also once we get into December and the second half of the year, if regulations change, there are plenty of other venues besides the convention center we can play. Bankers Life is available. There are parts of Lucas Oil Stadium we could use. So we can be very creative and very nimble just to kind of keep the ball moving here.
Would it be possible, has this been discussed, to actually host all of March Madness in central Indiana?
It has not been discussed. We've certainly shared our smaller scale bubble concepts, Schultz-like concept with the NCAA. But as I mentioned, we're planning for the NCAA like it's happening, the Final Four, like it's happening in its traditional sense. That said, I would sure love to host a few of these events as a proof of concept should it become necessary to do some modified type of environment for March Madness tournament. We want to be able to provide some level of confidence to the NCAA that we would be a good partner in that endeavor.
In the meantime, during the pandemic, the Sports Corp has continued to do, it's one of its basic functions, which is to bid on future sports events. Can you give me a sense of what those events would be? What are you going after?
Yeah, so we have every reason to believe. We've been on a number of NCAA championships. I think I mentioned this at the beginning of the podcast here. Certainly, we spend a lot of time on basketball, but the NCAA has 90 other championships, collegiate sports, which, we love the opportunity to host. We're pretty active. It's been reported that pursuing things like future Olympic trial opportunities, the Big Ten Conference, we have a great relationship with them right now. We have football through 2022 and men's and women's basketball through 2022. They opened up a competitive bid process for all three of those events for years 23 through 30. So, I sort of joke with people, we're trying to figure out what we're doing next week, and we're trying to figure out what we're doing in 2030 simultaneously, which is sometimes a little bit of a challenge. But, we're pursuing all of those opportunities as well. Our mission, again, is to have, positive impact on our community through sports and attracting events to locate here, to raise our profile and to contribute positively to our downtown economic vitality is critical. And so we hustle, we're out there chasing it. We believe this is a sports town. The nation believes in our ability to host sports, and it's our job to make that marriage happen.
And given that every city is grappling with this challenge of opening back up again, hosting sports events, is this an opportunity for Indianapolis to, I don't want to say corner the market, but secure even more long-term contracts for large events if Indianapolis can present itself as one of the few cities that really has this act together?
Absolutely. We try to present ourselves in a leadership position on many fronts every year. But this year in particular, that's been important to us, so that the people know that they can continue to count on us as being innovative and reliable. I really, kudos to my leadership team and to our board to your previous question, keeping our team intact and recognizing that it was as important to work on our future as it was to deal with our present. And that required our staff being here, present, available, and focused. And I think we're well positioned to do that. I'm on a weekly call with several of my peers in other major markets, and I can tell you that we're faring well relative to that competition. And those folks are my friends, and I hate to hear them talk about the challenges they're going through, but it does give me a lot of gratitude for the community we have here and the support they give us. And it's time for us to return that favor.
What kind of challenges are they dealing with that we're not?
Well, let's look at Chicago. Chicago is a great, peer and competitor of ours as it relates to the Big Ten. Their mayor has been pretty clear that they're not going to have any convention until there's a vaccine. And most of the folks that work in the sports commission have been furloughed or laid off. And so they don't have the staff that we have to even respond to some of these bids, right? And so that's just very tough. That's a city that, like us, prides itself in its sports identity and its hosting of major events, and fewer people are having to do a lot more work with a lot less time and resources. And, that's a significant challenge.
Well, best of luck on this idea. And we'll check in with you and hopefully we'll have some exciting news to report.
Yeah, I would love to pick up the phone and call you and Mickey and say, hey, I got good news. We'll keep our fingers crossed.
All right. Well, I really appreciate it, Ryan.
Yeah, thank you.
My thanks again to Ryan Vaughn. You can read more about the Indiana Sports Corp strategy for bidding on future events in this week's print edition of IBJ. And there are a couple of other stories I want to draw your attention to. Greg Andrews explores the main steps that Muncie-based First Merchants Bank is taking to settle investigations that it engaged in redlining majority Black Indianapolis census tracts. Merchants has disputed the claims, but it has agreed to a number of moves, including building a $2 million branch at East 38th Street and Meadows Drive, investing more than $1 million to help subsidize mortgages in majority Black neighborhoods, and originating $4 million in loans for development of multifamily housing. Again, you can read these stories in the latest print edition of IBJ or online at ibj.com. I will say that it's a lot easier to access all of IBJ's award-winning business content if you have a subscription. It works out to about $2 per week, which is pretty good for the amount of information that can help you make important decisions in the next few months. Just go to ibj.com and click on the subscribe button. Thanks again for making time this week for the IBJ podcast, which is edited by Leslie Weidenbender. I'm Mason King. Hang in there, everybody. We'll be back again next week.